The first film I did was unexpected. It was about a girl being kidnapped until the reveal at the end to show that it was actually a student film. My role in the film was lighting. Before the shoot, I researched different lighting techniques such as using a reflector to diffuse light and bouncing it off different areas such as white walls to soften it. For research, I read the book The Visual Story 2nd edition by Bruce Bloch. It talks about the effect of colour and how colour can affect the scene. For example, the colour red can make the subject seem closer to the camera, and the colour blue can make the subject seem further away from the camera. I also took inspiration from the film The Godfather. The film has an orange and black colour scheme that remains consistent throughout the film and can be used to foreshadow death. I combined the idea of having a colour scheme such as red and blue, and using the colours to symbolise a deeper meaning to the audience, such as the red light on the girl's face to connotate that she is in danger, and the blue on the kidnapper to distance himself from the audience. One thing I did successfully with the lighting and what went well were the colours were clear and prominent, which made the scene more atmospheric. It also went well as it allowed me to learn how to use gels to change the colour of light and the effect they have by adding a blue gel for a colder scene and tone. What didn't go too well was my ability to light in moderation. As I didn't understand lighting techniques such as 3-point lighting, it meant I just lit a scene with one light, which often meant some shots were oversaturated with the colour and made it look less cinematic. If I could do it differently, I think I'd spend more time thinking about the way I light the scene, such as lighting the subject and the background rather than just pointing the light at them. For example, I'd experiment with high and low key lighting to see how it could change the effect and tone of the scene and separate the subject from the background. Finally, for health and safety, the main concern I had was people's eyes being damaged by the light. To prevent any damage and incident, I would shout, "Watch your eyes," before turning on the light, and making sure not to point it directly into anyone's vision and trying to point it to the side of them or reflect it off a wall. The second film I worked on was The Promise. The story was about a spy who promised to protect his girlfriend and swore nothing would happen to her, but broke that promise and killed her when she was the next person on his hit list. My role on this film was editor, although I did help with some cinematography. For research, I looked into pre-existing spy films, specifically James Bond Casino Royale. I liked the opening of this film as Bond's posture is very powerful. He has very stoic facial expressions. Since the focus on this film was mise-en-scene, I feel taking inspiration from Bond was useful as it allowed for a more believable performance. Not only this, but the change in scene paced through the use of editing also inspired me, as it would go from slow-paced editing to fast-paced editing through the uses of cuts and flashbacks, and I felt like I could apply this to my own work to make the spy narrative more believable and immersive for the audience. What I did well in this film was the use of effects. I decided by using VFX I could help aid the narrative and make it more believable. For example, the globe HUD on his watch. It was a good experience and also gave me skills in After Effects which allowed me to learn the software better. However, it was also the use of my VFX that made the film lack in professionalism slightly. For example, the hologram coming out of his watch is shaky and ruins the effect of the shot. This is because I hadn't had previous experience in motion tracking and therefore keyframed the position of the composition instead, which resulted in uneasy and inaccurate motion. If I could go back and do it again, I'd learn how to motion track or perhaps change the script so that these effects weren't necessary. From a cinematography aspect, what went well is that I used a variety of shots such as an establishing shot, close-up, etc. Gave me a better understanding of cinematography and how shots can help portray emotion and narrative. What didn't work well is that I didn't adjust the camera settings. As we didn't have lighting and the room was fairly dark, the footage became grainy as a result. If I could go back and do it again, I'd adjust the aperture, shutter speed, and as a last result the ISO to reduce the grain and make the footage more cinematic. For health and safety, my main concern was editing. Due to VFX, it meant I was often sitting on my computer for long periods of time, so to reduce any damage to my back or eyes I would take regular breaks. Health and safety issues on set would be tripping over items because the room was so dark and obviously people on set wouldn't be able to see, so we kept everything to the bare essentials, so the camera and the tripod, and we would mark things on the floor on tape so that everyone would be able to see where equipment was, which would reduce the risk of anyone tripping and injuring themselves. The third film I worked on was Broken. It was about two serial killers and a deaf person. However, one killer is revealed to be the deaf person's friend in a mask and is revealed to be a fake killer, while the real killer isn't revealed to the end when they stab the deaf person. I was editor and also worked on sound. For inspiration, we looked at the original 1978 horror film Halloween. By having a long take in the beginning from the point of view of the killer, we were able to build tension and atmosphere and establish that the character is being watched and create an unsettling atmosphere for the audience, which will hopefully be received by the audience due to the intertextual reference to Halloween and their understanding of the horror film and genre. Another film we took inspiration from was Hush, a horror film about a deaf character being stalked by a killer. We based our main character from the character in this film, as obviously we couldn't include dialogue in this, so we thought referencing Hush would be a good way to do this as we included a deaf character. Finally, I also took inspiration from the MacGuffin theory, popularised by Hitchcock. Hitchcock explained it as a plot device that has no specific meaning or purpose other than to advance the story, any situation that motivates the action of a film, either artificially or substantively. The MacGuffin in our plot is tricking the audience into thinking that the friend is the killer, when in reality there is a second killer. What went well was the use of editing. Since I had edited in the previous film, it was good to gain experience in the horror genre and gave me a better understanding of horror conventions, and by following them, I was able to build atmospheric tension. What didn't work well, however, was the sound. I had never had experience with sound in the past, which meant I didn't understand the audio levels, for example the ideal audio level being -12. Not only this, but as the audio equipment was booked in someone else's name and they took it home, they attempted to transfer the files to me via WeTransfer. However, the files were corrupted and therefore unusable. As a result, I had to Foley the sound in post. If I could do it again, then I would have experience with the equipment beforehand. For example, I'd book the Tascam recorder out before recording, so when it came to being on set, I knew how to work the equipment. Alternatively, I would have audio recording directly into the camera as a backup. This way I wouldn't have to spend as much time in editing Foley and the sound in. To quote George Lucas, the sound and music are 50% of the entertainment in a movie. If I hadn't Foleyed my sound, then the film would have been disinteresting and failed. Although it wasn't ideal, I had to Foley the sound in, as otherwise the film wouldn't have been successful or create the same amount of tension without it. The main health and safety issue was I was listening to so much audio, as I had 11 different audio tracks, and it meant that loads of audio was at different levels, so I could potentially damage my hearing. So I tried to edit through my speakers rather than my earphones going directly into my ears. Not only this, but health and safety on set was the boom pole. As I wasn't used to doing audio before, keeping my arms up in the air would put strain on my shoulders and arms, so I would try and take breaks between takes while we looked over footage. Finally, my last film was Inverted. The story is someone playing an RPG game for an extensive amount of time, and then the game crashes and restarts without them saving it, which meant they have to play the game again. My main role in this film was the editor, but with the RPG aspect of it, not the real life footage. My idea was based off the original Pokemon games in terms of their aesthetic 8-bit style. I also took inspiration from the cartoon The Amazing World of Gumball, specifically the episode The Console. In the episode, the characters get stuck in an RPG game, and once they escape, they restart the game as they didn't get 100% in completion. I didn't want to copy the story exactly, so I changed the ending to the game crashing. What went well is that I was able to learn new tools and software in Adobe Illustrator, such as the rectangular grid tool. Not only this, but the integrated workflow between Adobe Illustrator and Adobe After Effects made creating the animation easier, as I was able to use the Illustrator files as layers in After Effects and keyframe the positions of the character to create movement. However, one thing that didn't go well was the realism of the work. For example, apart from the characters, there was no movement in the scene, such as clouds in the sky. It may have caused the scene to become boring and static, and therefore lose audience interest. If I could go back to do it again, I'd spend more time on the smaller details of the scene to make it more visually pleasing to the audience through better animation quality. There were limited health and safety issues with this project. I just had to remember to take breaks, as animating and the continuous movement could have caused damage, for example RSI. Overall, the 4 films went well. They were good as I was able to develop and establish new skills and interests in certain fields such as editing and lighting. But what didn't go as well is that because I just learnt these skills, I wasn't able to polish them, which may have made the final product a bit more amateurish. But overall, I'm very happy with the standard of the films.